many of you are ready to start a podcast? Oh, good. And if not, we're going to convince you. We're very convincing. So today we're going to talk about how to start a podcast. We are experts in how to start podcasts that you don't continue making anymore. That you quit after 9 episodes. I quit one after 9 episodes. But we're also experts because we've been hosting one podcast for 5 years, and then we launched a second podcast this year. So we feel very smart. We love podcasts, so we're podcast listeners as much as we are podcast creators. We think people really love to talk about what they heard on a podcast. So if you want to do that with us later, we want to talk about cereal. We are so excited about that. So our first podcast is the Popcast. We started it 5 years ago. It is a weekly pop culture podcast. We talk about a number of topics. We talk about bosses and pop culture. We talk about pop culture conspiracy theories. Is Poop Lovato real? Those are serious conversations that we have each week. We talk about the nose. We have a whole nose where we talk about the nose of motherhood. And so it's just a fun, lighthearted, we have a good time on that podcast. Then this year, we launched a second, and believe it or not, adjacent podcast called The Bible Binge. The Bible Binge is a recap show where we recap Bible stories like you would recap Game of Thrones or The Bachelor. And we talk about it. That show now has as many listeners as the podcast, which is crazy. And so, in this, like each season of that show has a theme. And so in our first season that came out this year, because it's seasonal, we do 6 episodes a season, and then we take breaks. And this show, the first season was the family tree of Jesus, hence the Noah and Tiffany, because the Bible doesn't give her an actual name, but she is valuable. So we just named her Tiffany. And this is Knox, my partner. He'll talk to you a little bit about him.
So when we started the show 5 years ago, I lived in Chattanooga, right outside Chattanooga. I was writing on the internet, which is a fancy way of saying I was blogging like an animal on the internet. But by day, I ran a t-shirt printing shop, and I hated it. I didn't like working in retail. My dream was to write. I was freelancing some screenwriting stuff, and I wanted to write a book. And I had a book agent at the time, and we were trying to shop a book proposal. And it wasn't really jumping off like I thought it should have been. And the thing that I kept hearing was like, you need a bigger platform. So I thought, okay, I need to build a platform here, which is why we got the idea from the show. So cut to 5 years later, I do have a book. It's coming out in November. Promise I won't be annoying with it, like whatever.
November 13th. Please pre-order now.
Yeah, so that's what I was doing. So now, Jamie, what were you doing?
Okay, so for me, I got a liberal arts degree, which was, I don't know if you've heard, those are useless. And so I was working in nonprofits, because nonprofits, their standards are low. They're like, will you work for no money? Come, we love you. So I worked for DHR, and then I worked for nonprofits in Birmingham. I worked in the marketing departments and event planning. And I was working at Children's Aid Society here, which I still really love, the organization. And then I quit my job, and I was blogging at the time and watching an enormous amount of TV. And it was like, how do I monetize blogging and watching a lot of TV? And his dream was to write a book. My dream was to get free stuff on the internet. Guys, all I wanted was a pair of Rothy's, and I stand before you today. A dream has come true. I got these for free. This is Rothy's sponsors our show. So, all right. So when we're talking about recording a show, how do you know? What do you do first? Like, what are the things you need to know before you even hit record on your computer? And first, you need to think about what's your goal. One goal can be that you want to build an audience to get a book deal. Maybe it's to build an audience for your business. And here's the beauty. Podcast audiences are fantastic. And we know this firsthand because they're very sticky. And by that, we mean 80% of people who listen to podcasts listen to it all the way through. That's Nielsen research. And so where somebody might bail on a 4,000 word article or your book halfway through while they checked it out at the library and you've made no money, people will listen to you on your podcast. And advertisers are really drawn to that. And so that can be an incentive. Maybe your goal is to build a connection to your existing audience. Maybe you have customers and you're wanting them to know more about the people behind the brand. You're wanting to share a little bit about what we do in our business, or we want you to hear our voice. And remember that when you buy from us, you're buying from an actual person. Maybe your goal is to create valuable and repurposable content. So maybe you're like, hey, I would love to be able to take the transcript of a podcast episode and make that into blog content. Or maybe for us, we are in the process of thinking about content that we've already created and how do we put that into a book format. And so it can create content that can go lots of places, social media, elsewhere. And then maybe it is to develop your speaking skills. Maybe you're like, look, I really want to have a speaking career, but I talk bad, and so I need to talk good. So I can have a podcast. For me, I really was like, I really want to talk more, speak more at events, but I'm not good at it. And so thankfully we've had 265 episodes for me to get a little bit better at it. And maybe your goal is to simply make that paper. In the podcast press, it says, make that paper. And you can. Podcasts can be a fantastic source of revenue. For us, we had other jobs, as you saw. When we started the podcast, we had other full-time jobs. And then through the course of the last 5 years, we slowly kind of trickled out of those. We were able to quit our jobs, go to freelancing, get out of that. And for the last almost 2 years, this has been full-time, our job. And we have 2 people on staff. So it has created a way, and we can afford a membership here. It's very magical. So as you're thinking about who is your listener, who is your listener? In the same way that you create a customer avatar, you know what your ideal customer looks like, you do the same with your listener. We did not do this because when we started it was a hobby and we didn't care, like we didn't put the effort into when we first started. We just thought, this will be fun. And then we started thinking about who is our listener. Because we know that the average podcast listener, 60% of all podcast listeners are men. That is not the data for our show. 80% of our listeners are women, which makes Knox super pumped about how many women comment on his life every given week. And so knowing who it is you're providing content to, deciding how old is that person, how much money do they make, because that's stuff that advertisers will want. So as you grow your show, you're going to need to be able to provide that data. You'll do that, obviously, through a listener survey later down the road, which we'll talk about a little later in this.
Okay, so let's talk about equipment and hosting. So you decided you want to make a podcast, which is amazing. We're so happy for you. The good thing about podcasting is the barrier to entry is very low right now. So it's very, there's a lot of competition, a lot of supply on the internet for microphones. This is an example of the microphone we use. It's a Blue Yeti. It costs between $100 to $200. You don't have to buy 3, you can just buy 1, which is great. But it's a great audio quality, and all you really need is a laptop, a Wi-Fi signal, and a microphone. I would urge you, there's an impulse to like spend a lot of money and like do a lot of prep before you do the content. I would say focus on the content first. You can always spend thousands of dollars on equipment later. Don't do that now. Make sure your content is sound, because what if you hate podcasting or you're terrible at it and you've got $1,000 of equipment? Like, you don't want that. And then for hosting.
No, I was going to ask a question.
Sure.
What did you say that microphone was?
Blue Yeti.
Blue Yeti.
Yeah, Blue Yeti. Yeah, they're available USB mics on Amazon. They're great. They're great versions of that. For hosting, there's a lot of host options out there. These are the 2 I've heard most about. We've actually used Libsyn for our first show, and we had to switch when we got on a network. Now we're on a host that charges us way too much money, but it's fine. We're not bitter about it. But for the Bible Bench, we use Libsyn, and you can get in there $5 to $10 a month, which is great. That's really what you need. They have great customer service, and it's kind of bare bones, but that's all you need up front. Podbean, we haven't used that, but I've heard that it's really good, and you don't have to be that attractive to use it, so that's great. Like, if you're not that attractive, you can definitely do that. The 2 main things to know, like I said, I wouldn't pay more than $20 or $30 a month. If you're doing that, you're probably paying too much. Secondly, own your own content. There are a lot of platforms. One approached us to come on, and they'll give you a very lucrative offer to come on, but they will own your content. Never do that. Always, if you're going to go through the process of creating it, editing it, getting it out into the world, make sure you own that. Never, ever, ever give that content up.
So when you're thinking about what type of show you want to have, you want to think about what is the format. So the most common formats, and look, you can create a hybrid and make something that's fantastic and unique to you. But I do want to cover kind of the basic types of shows there are. So ours is a conversational show. Our tagline is that we educate on things that entertain but don't matter, because they 100%, Poo Lovato does not matter, right? Well, I know, maybe to Debbie. But, so we have a conversational show, you could have that kind of show. Interviews, so one-on-one interviews. Maybe you are in a field where you're like, I know my listeners would love to hear me talk to other people who make jewelry. And so I'm gonna have that podcast where I interview people, like Death, Sex, and Money. You might have a solo commentary show, which are the easiest to make, the hardest to be great. So solo commentary commentary means you might script it, you can sit down, and it's just you. You don't have to fuss with a partner who's annoying. Like, you don't have to do all that. You don't have to deal with interviews that don't show up on time or don't have good equipment or the audio's bad. You can control it, like Dan Carlin does, and he makes a fantastic show. But they are very difficult to get off the ground because they have to be riveting. You have to be riveting. Another type of show is a panel. Ben Blacker does this on the writers panel. So he brings in 2 or more writers every time he has an episode and interviews them as a panel. It could be a panel like Slate has a lot of panel podcasts where they're talking to people about the news, and it's a whole group of people. Obviously the bar gets higher to jump the more people that you have, because what happens is 2 of you are great and 1 of you is not great at all. And it's also your brother-in-law, and so you're like, I'm gonna have to fire him, but also see him at Thanksgiving. So next is nonfiction storytelling. That's what most people are drawn to. Those are the most popular podcasts are nonfiction storytelling, because people like Sarah Koenig are doing a great job. Phoebe Judge on Criminal. They're very high degree of difficulty. But when you hit it, you can make the most money ever. Sarah Koenig lived in that high life. Okay, and then fiction storytelling. Fiction storytelling, maybe you have a great story you want to tell and you don't want to do it in writing. You want to put it in an audio format. Maybe as a test for moving forward to another platform. Gimlet did that with Homecoming. It's a fictional podcast, and now it's going to be a TV show starring Julia Roberts. And so it was a great test run to get to a bigger platform. And then repurposed. Maybe you're already creating audio content because you're doing trainings. Maybe you're doing workshops. You're already creating content. Maybe you're making videos. You're working on YouTube. You can pull that audio and then create that to make your own content. Arc Stories, which is here in Birmingham, is a storytelling event that happens every month. They record that audio, and then they have a bi-monthly podcast that comes out featuring 2 of those stories in each of their episodes. So it's just another way to have content.
Okay, so let's talk about producing content for your episodes. So, like we said, there's so much opportunity with podcasts. You can literally talk about anything you want, which is great, but it can also be paralyzing. There can be analysis or process by analysis when you're trying to think, what in the world should I talk about? So what we do, we have an overarching principle. We want to, in every single thing we do, we want to be entertaining, we want to be informing. Okay, that defines every single thing we do. So that's what I would urge you to also have, that declarative mission statement. You know who you're making a show for, also have like, what's the overall vibe of what I want these to be. So that helps inform everything we do. We say it in our tagline at the beginning of episodes, delightful idiocy. You could describe it as charismatic stupidity. That's what we're going for when we make something, right? So the thing we understand is, like, we're not NPR, we're not Vital. So the value we want to bring to the table is we want to be very entertaining, very informative, so it makes you feel like you took something away from the show. So specific to our episodes, there's 4 main episode elements, okay? Number 1, we have a cold open. The cold open, it's like a random moment taken from that episode where we're trying to be very funny, kind of prime laughter and humor for the episode. Number 2, we have our intro and our call to action. The intro is just like, what are we doing? What are we talking about? And the call to action is the ask we have for that specific episode. A lot of people feel weird about asking something up front. Don't feel weird about that. You're doing this for a reason. You're probably not doing it for the sake of art. And if you are, that's great. That sounds exhausting. So make your call to action early and make it specific. Don't be like, make the world a better place. That's what we're asking. That's stupid. Don't do that. Be like, make the world a better place by reviewing us on iTunes. You've given them something to accomplish. Then we get to segment A. This is the big idea of our episode. This is where we spend the most time. Usually we'll take a subject like bosses in pop culture, okay? We'll define it very broadly, we'll speak about it very broadly, and then the more we get into that segment, the weirder and hopefully funnier we're getting with that idea, and we try to pull up right before it gets too weird or absurd. But that's kind of how we balance it. The information, entertainment balance kind of starts to tip at that point, right? And then the last segment we end on is the light segment, okay? This is where we make a recommendation. We like to curate. The main body of the episode doesn't allow for a ton of curation, and since that's a big part of what we do, we like to take that opportunity to do it. So we give a red light, which is a bit of a mini editorial in the episode where we can speak from something from our own life to make that connection, right? Because fundamentally, podcasting is very intimate, right? We're in your ears. see us as a person, and the more you can facilitate that connection, the better off you'll be. Like an example, I red lit. You can red like something you don't like. A couple weeks ago, I red lit Jamie because I saw Hamilton for the first time, and it was incredible. And I was like, why didn't you tell me this earlier? Why didn't you make me watch that? So like, it's dumb, but it's an opportunity to do something like that. And then a green light is just anything we have read, watched, listened to, a TV show, something we like that we think our audience will like. So we want to we've created entertaining value, informative value, and hopefully a recommendation value. So we're trying to create value all across the board with the things we're creating. So that is specific to us, right? That's our specific dynamic. Mileage may vary on what you're trying to do or what you're trying to accomplish, but no matter what you're doing, I think there's 3 elements you definitely have to have when you are producing content. You want the repetition of execution. You want, every episode should feel kind of like the one that came before. It doesn't have to be exactly like it, but people like the expectation of, okay, I know what I'm getting here. That is sometimes a barrier to entry when you're not doing it on the same day or you're not doing it in the same way. So try to create that consistency. Number 2, again, that early call to action. Train people to know you're gonna ask something. In return, you're gonna create something awesome, but you are gonna ask them to do something, and that's okay. And number 3, you have to create an awesome piece of content. I think a lot of people think the impulse of making something is like validates it, but it doesn't. Like, you have to be thoughtful and intentional because there's so much content out there. There are so many shows, it's so easy to make one that you have to differentiate yourself from the crowd. So make sure it's awesome, because something we like to think about is you're not entitled to an audience. You have to earn your audience. So make sure you're doing stuff that makes it really, really easy for someone to listen to. Okay, let's talk about recording really quick. Software-wise, the 2 main ones you'll see is GarageBand and Audacity. Those are the easiest ones to access. I don't think Audacity is available on a Mac, and obviously GarageBand is a Mac recording software, so it depends on where you go. I use GarageBand because it's most intuitive, and that's just how I taught myself to use it. I know there's Adobe Audition and Hindenburg. If you're more technically savvy, you could probably offer those, but what we do, I think GarageBand is more than good enough for what you want to try. And then let's talk about studio setup. Like, don't go crazy. Like, settle down. You're just making a podcast. You're not like building an airport. You know, like, don't feel like you have to egg crate your whole wall. Just play the hits, do the basics, right? The biggest thing is don't limit your hard surfaces. Okay, so a room like this would be terrible for podcasting because noise bounces off hard spaces because of science. We know that, right? But if you're in a situation where you have to have hard surfaces, like in my house, I have a hard floor, a hardwood desk, windows. So what I do, I put down a lot of towels and blankets, and I bought some blackout soundproof curtains off Amazon for like $40. So it's not going to bust your budget, but you do want to minimize echo-ness and hollowness in your voice, because nothing will turn someone off faster than terrible audio quality. Because if you can't even do that, what are the odds of you making good content? Probably 0.
And as for that goes, both of us record at home. Like, we have studio space, walk-in closet, studio space at home, and then we work here until Kim opens a studio that we all want her to open so that we can record YouTube videos and such. So what do you do when you're recording with another person? Not whether it's a partner or a panel or you're interviewing someone else. The key in that is having chemistry. Now, with someone that you're just going to interview for an episode, that can be difficult. When you're interviewing someone, you need to know as much as humanly possible about that person. One, that helps create your content, right? You know what to ask. You know what's already been asked of them. So many people like Knox has a book coming out in November, so he's going to appear on a lot of podcasts. The hope is that they won't just go, oh, what's it like hosting a podcast, right? Because that's boring. But if they can ask things like, so what was it like in the 6th grade when you punched this kid in the face? Like, that's awesome, right? You want to create good content when you're interviewing someone. But when you're partnering with someone like us, the way we record, and know this, when we first started, we did not live in the same city. And for the first 2.5 years, we never saw each other in person. Like, we had met in person at a conference, because we met online, like all good relationships are. And then we met online in a writing forum, and then we met at a conference in person, and then we started a podcast and didn't see each other again in person for 2.5 years. Now he's moved to Birmingham, and we still only see each other maybe once a week because we record. He likes to get work early. I prefer a more 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. schedule, and so we don't even see each other. So you don't have to be in the same room. We talked about being in the same room when we moved here, and we actually vetoed it because we really liked the idea of still just seeing each other on Google Hangout, and so we use Google Hangout for our recording.
And if you are, to go back to the software conversation, if you are planning to do an interview podcast, I would recommend the Ecamm software on Skype. It's $40, which is a little expensive, but the good thing of what it does is, like, we know what we're doing when we're recording and how to make good audio and all that stuff. If you're having someone on, they might not know that. They might not know to not have echoing rooms, so you can only mitigate so much. What this does is it records your audio, but also their audio into one stream or to two separate streams. So if they do have terrible audio, it gives you the opportunity to edit or to finesse the sound a little bit. So if you are doing an interview podcast, it's well worth the investment to try something like that. Okay, so editing. That's what editing is like. So look at it. If you're thinking about doing a podcast, look at that.
Yeah.
The big question, do you need to edit your show? Yes, you absolutely do. Everything needs an edit in all forms of life, okay? The bigger question from that is, do you do it yourself or do you subcontract it out? So for what we do, I handle the editing because it's the voice of our show is such a big part of who we are. I don't trust someone to handle that. And plus, a lot of what we do is improvisationally based. Like, we have a skeleton, we know what we're trying to accomplish in the show, but we don't know what each other's going to say. So we give ourselves the room to run and try lots of weird things. Most of it gets cut out, but we highlight the stuff that actually works. So in that sense, you need to think about your show or whatever you're doing. Is it a low maintenance episode or show, or is it high maintenance? Ours is extraordinarily high maintenance. It's very high maintenance.
I feel like you chose this because this is me. Wait, I do feel like that's true.
That's the heart of our show. If you boil it down to its basis element, that's our show. If you're doing like a panel, that's a very low maintenance show. You can't really edit that. You don't want to edit that. But for what we do, you definitely want to edit that. So let's throw up. This is an example of 2 streams of audio. This is my audio. This is Jamie's audio. These are untouched, unedited perfection. Right? It looks great. It looks glorious. Now, like 50 years later, after the editing process is done, every single one of these little cut-ups, that's how we have to touch up our editing, right? We have to add the music. This is stuff we're saving for later, because maybe it'll be funny, maybe it'll be a cold open. It's an extensive process, but it's what makes our show what our show is. We know that, so that's why editing is a big deal. We'll never subcontract that out. Your show might not look like this, but it's important to know the process of editing and the value of editing. The big thing for us was I wanted to know how extensive the editing was, so if we weren't going to pay for it, we know what we'd be getting. We know no one in the world would ever subject themselves to this, so I have to do it. So that's why we do it, which is fun.
Yeah, and you can. We had one person attempt an episode once of ours to edit it, and they added a lot of clown-like sound effects. And I was like, oh my god. Yeah, it was very upsetting. And so, but it is actually easier than you think to find an editor. You can go on to, there are podcast forums, there are podcast Facebook groups where editors are just waiting for you to ask the question. And they're good. A lot of them are good. You may listen to some independent podcasts. The great thing is just email them and say, who edits your show? You ask Knox, do you want to edit the show? He'll say no, because he doesn't even want to edit our show, but it's part of his job. And so finding an editor can be a really easy process. So it doesn't have to be a difficult part of what you're doing.
Yeah. So then let's talk about lengths of shows really quick. After you've edited, you want to jump in knowing kind of where you want your show to land. The 3 main sections of lengths of shows, 5 to 10 minutes. That's kind of crazy because you're having to pack a lot into a little bite. It's good in theory, but you have to be really intentional and good about making sure you're accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish in 5 to 10 minutes. That's why an NPR show is like that. They're just smarter than we are, so we've never attempted that. The Daily is a good example of a show that's 20 to 30 minutes. Honestly, 20 to 30 minutes is the sweet spot. That's a great length. Because it's not so exhaustive, but really because the average commute is about 20 to 30 minutes. So you're giving someone an opportunity to listen to your entire show in one commute, which is great. We land in the 45 to 60 minute zone. That gives you enough time to try some things, but you do have to be diligent and thoughtful and a good steward of someone's time. So if you are going for an hour, you have some opportunities to try some things, but make sure you're taking advantage of that time and not just like not editing yourself and letting it run. Like you want to make sure you're doing a good job.
And people also like shorter shows just because they listen to a lot of shows. And so they look at their podcast feed and they go, how many of these can I knock out of my queue today? Oh, I can knock all the dailies out. In the time that it would take me to listen to one Pete Holmes episode, because it's 2.5 hours long. Pete, I need you to edit. Come on. All right, so you've created a podcast episode that you're so proud of, and it's been edited and it's brilliant, and you're like, I am the next Ira Glass. This is so exciting that person's coming from Birmingham. But you need feedback. When we launched the Bible Binge earlier this year, we said, we're going to do this one different. We're going to really try hard to launch well. And the first thing we did when we created a pilot episode, which was actually Noah, we took the story of Noah in the Bible and we recapped it. We took it and we sent it to people. The types of people that you want to send your show to. You want to send it to other podcasters. It's very important for experts in the field to listen to your show. Your mom is great, but she's not necessarily an expert in the field, unless your mom is Sarah Koenig. And then, oh my God, I want to be friends with you. So you want to have a podcaster listen. Now, most podcasters don't mind listening to your show. You probably need to barter or trade with them in some way, like say, hey, I have this great big platform and I'll talk about your show on it if you'll listen to my episode and give me some feedback. Because we will want to give you, like if you send us your show, we would want to give you really valuable feedback. We will talk to you about editing and we'll talk to you about the way the show moves and how quickly it moves. So talking to podcasters. The second is you want to send it to somebody who's in your target audience. Somebody who's maybe already a customer or somebody who you go, this is my listener avatar. I want them to listen. And someone who already listens to podcasts. Because you can have two different people. You can have the listener avatar that listens to podcasts, say to your audience on your Facebook page or on your Instagram, say, hey, who here listens to podcasts? And somebody's going to pop up, somebody that you're already familiar with their name because they're already commenting a lot or interacting with you a lot or they purchase a lot of products from you, and say, hey, will you listen to this and give me some general feedback and guide that feedback? Ask them, hey, was it too long? Were you ever bored? What kind of things happen when you listen? And then the other is to ask somebody who doesn't listen to podcasts to listen, because the industry is always wanting to add new people to the fold, right? Although millions and millions of people listen to podcasts, and there are more than 500,000 podcasts right now available on the internet, you want to have people who maybe you're the reason, you're the gateway. Your podcast is the gateway. Why they start listening is because of you and getting feedback from them. The final person that I think it's really important to have listen to your podcast is somebody that's an expert about the thing you're talking about. Now with the podcast, having people that we knew that love pop culture and listen to it, like care very much about pop culture, was important. Although our listener avatar actually doesn't care about pop culture that much. Most of our listener avatars, they just like to hear us talk about dumb stuff. They don't really care what the dumb stuff is. But with the Bible Binge, we thought about that pretty aggressively. We wanted somebody who was an expert on the Bible to listen to us talk about the Bible. Because we were trying to avoid heresy generally as a rule. I just think that's the Bible. And so when we first started the show, it was a recap, and then we would have a section called, So What, Who Cares? So why does the story matter? And that's the show we sent off to get feedback on. Well, one of the people we sent it to was a Bible editor and Bible studies editor at Lifeway. And she came back and sent us feedback that was time-stamped. Well, this is not true. This is not accurate. This is what scholars have found. And she went into detail. Well, then, because of that feedback, we actually added a segment to the end of our show called The Gentle Rebuke, where a Bible scholar comes in and actually rebukes back, and then we talk to that person on air. Like we go, no, we agree to disagree, whatever, doesn't matter, who cares? You know, Methodists are weird, whatever. Like, we just do the rebuke on the air, and it's actually made the show, in many ways, bulletproof, because all the people who, like, go, ugh, they're such heretics, and they're like, oh, there's that Bible scholar. And we're like, sucker, can't judge us.
Is it the same Bible scholar, or is it different ones?
It's different ones. So we had one for the first season, and we've had a different one for as we've moved on. So still expertise, but coming from different backgrounds too, which has also helped.
Okay, so you've gotten feedback, you've applied, you've tweaked, it's perfect. So now you have to get it out to the world. This is not that difficult. It'll feel a little overwhelming if you look in the wrong place, but broadly speaking, what you want to do is you want to go to iTunes Connect. It'll take you to a podcast portal. You've got to sign up with your Apple account. And then this is where you want to hook in with your host. Why I like Libsyn is because they have tutorials about exactly what you need to do to get submitted to Apple properly. The content-wise, the biggest no we would give is don't just come in with one episode. Maybe have a teaser and then 2 episodes. You want additional content because Apple likes that, first of all, but also because when you're launching and you just have 1 episode, people don't know if you just randomly had a good episode or if you're good at what you do. And if you have multiple pieces of content, it verifies the proof of concept. So that's something really important. Also, make sure you're getting it out to all the different places like Spotify and Google Play because of Alexa. Spotify is an up and coming. Spotify is like the opposite of SoundCloud. Everyone acts like SoundCloud is going to do podcasts. They're not. Don't pay attention to them. Spotify is. You definitely want to get on Spotify and Google Play just for the Alexa component.
The other thing too is you're submitting, and we don't really talk about this, but one of the things when you're submitting your podcast is you needed to name it, right? You need a description of it, and we did not work hard on the name of our podcast. The first one we asked friends, what would you name it? You've listened to the pilot, what would you call it? And Erin Moon, who is now our COO of our company, at the time was just a friend that we got feedback from, she said we should name it 2 Tickets to Paradise. That's awful, right? Yeah, we hired her later for other expertise. She had other skills. And then our friend Catherine sent us and said, well, you should call it the Popcast. And we were like, oh my God, that's a good idea. Now, if we had been smart, then we would have done some research, like, just on trademark and copyright. And are there any other podcasts called that? By the way, there are a lot of other podcasts called that. We and the New York Times are the only successful ones. And the trademark is owned by somebody who doesn't even make podcasts. So our trademark attorney who helped us once we realized, I think we're violating a lot of copyright law. Because we're using like clips from TV shows without any license to do so. And we want to make money and not get sued, so we need to do this better. And one of the things they found is like, oh no, you and the New York Times are in the same boat. You're never going to get the trademark, but you also, no one can sue either of you for it because the people who own it. So knowing that going in, looking at social media, when we did the Bible binge, it was just in our brain that we might do it. We of course went on to Noam and we asked, hey, where can we get the Bible binge? Can we get it on Instagram and Facebook? Can we get a URL? And we were able, that helped us know, oh, that's the name we want, because we can get access to all of the social channels for it. If you have to end up having a podcast that you're like, I'm going to call it This American Life, but I'm just going to life with a Y, that will stand out. That is very unwise. So how do you find listeners? That's the biggest question. And like I said earlier, podcasting is huge and it's booming and it's great. But if you're a podcast listener, you know that sometimes it can be difficult to find new shows. And the number one way, this is true probably for you, but it's definitely true for all podcasts, according to Nielsen, is that the number one way people find podcasts is through word of mouth. Somebody tells you about a great show and you're like, oh, no. Or perhaps you hear the ad at the end of a network show where they play a little clip of a show, another show on their network, and then you just become a Gimlet person who only listens to Gimlet shows because you're like, these all seem great. So how do you find listeners? So first, you have to do the very thing we just talked about, which is you have to make something good so that somebody can word of mouth it for you. If you're not creating something great, no one's going to want to share it. And you have to be someone who's willing to share it. I think one of the biggest challenges for artists and creators is they're artists and they're creators, and I don't want to brag about my art. Well, you got to get over that in the world of podcasting. You have to brag about your art. Knox is the tech and I'm the marketer, and I'm always like, we make good stuff, and he's like, shut up, calm down. So make something good and talk about it. Next, experiment with social. There are lots of platforms. This is just good marketing 101. You need to find the platform that your listener avatar is on, and then hunker down and go big. Now, you can be on all social media, but sometimes you're not going to enjoy it. Does anybody enjoy being on Facebook? No, right? That's ridiculous. Except my mother. She's the only one. And she has a drug dealer GoFund, so she can't listen to podcasts. So we obviously don't hunker down as much on Facebook as we should, because it is the #1 social network. But it's very expensive to be a growing business on that platform. So we tried lots of different things. We tried YouTube. We took our audio and put some graphics to it and put it on YouTube and really worked that network very hard for 6 months, and it produced nothing for us. So then we went to Instagram because we're like, how dumb will that be? Because Instagram's a visual platform and we're an audio podcast and we're not models like that Podbean model. So how is this going to work? And guys, it killed. We are so successful on Instagram. Our engagement holds in stories at 60 and 70%. We have huge engagement on Instagram. It does not make logical sense. So now that's where we put all our energy because we know that we produce fruit there. And we've trained our listeners to go there. Hey, we're going to ask questions about this topic next week. We want to know who your favorite TV mom was. And they all scatter over to Instagram. They start Instagram accounts, and we're the only person they follow because they're so hopeful we'll mention their garbage mom pic and then make fun of them on our show. I love it. Next, you can ask your listeners to share. We do a program, our call to action every fourth time is for them to share with their people. And we say, use the hashtag #WildlifePopcast and please share this in stories. And then we intentionally share those, we add that to our own stories, and we feature those listeners that we love who've said nice things about us in our newsletter. So they know that they might hear or see their name somewhere, but you have to ask them to share. You have to be intentional. Your call to action, podcast listeners are not just always listeners. They are rabid fans because it's such an intimate, like Knox said, it's such an intimate relationship, and so people feel like they know you, and they're having conversations, but we don't even know Kim. We don't even know her. And she feels like she knows us, which is awesome because that's what we want to create. So we want to ask Kim, hey, will you write a review? Because it's really important. And Kim's like, oh my God, babe, yes, I'll write a review. So it's important to always ask them what you want them to do. Track analytics. So one of the things about what's good content, feelings are not facts in podcasting. Feelings are not facts. You can leave a show and go, oh my God, that was the best thing we've ever done. And then your analytics will tell you if that's true or not. Because we look back at analytics, and for a long time, Knox would always be like, we need to do episodes that are just a quick set of, we talk about pop culture news. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. That sounds awful. Nobody wants to listen to that. He was like, can you just indulge me once and let's do it? And I was like, okay, but it won't work. And then he lovingly screenshot those analytics and then he said, oh, this twice as many downloads as any other episode. I'm like, that's fake, it's not real. But alas, it was. And so now, every month, we do a recap of the news, and it's our most successful type of show. So looking at your analytics to help inform what's working, what do people like, and then looking at that qualitatively and going, what was it that made that work? Was it that we were really funny? Is it that we had a guest who really shared content when we had them on? What was it about it that made it grow? Next, to find listeners, do a listener survey. That will always help you. We do a listener survey once a year. We just ask people, hey, will you go fill out the survey? And so for the Bible Bench, we did that for the first time after our second season. We thought we knew who the listener of the Bible Bench was. We were wrong, because what we found was the average age of that listener was 26 years old. So we had a lot of questions of like, what's up with young people? All the youths, what are they doing? Like, why are they listening to our show? And so as we went back and asked a lot of those listeners who had filled out surveys to fill out a secondary, we were like, who's young? Fill this out again. And what we found is people were saying, I just don't know much about the Bible. Like, I know it's like people buy it and read it a lot, and I hear a lot about it, but I don't know anything about these stories. So that's why I listen, and we were like, interesting. And we also found out that 1/4 of the people who listen to the Bible Bench don't listen to the podcast. We hate that for us, because we need you to listen to both. But it helped us understand our listener better, and then it helps you find more listeners, because now I know who we're looking for. Now I know who to target, because I know who's listening to our show. Not only do you know who's listening to your show, but you know who's willing to go and do a listener survey for you when they hear a URL on an episode. Those are people that are the kind of people you want to replicate in people who are that committed you want to replicate. Network. Join podcasting masterminds. We're in a podcasting mastermind. So those people feel almost legally obligated to share our show with their people. They talk about our show on their shows. And guess what? Their shows have exactly what we want, which are listeners. And so connecting to other podcasters as you're growing a podcast is very helpful. One, to just get good feedback on things that work and things that don't work, but also to take advantage of their audience when they share it on their Instagram. Oh, I'm listening to this, and all those people scatter over. Be intentional about that. Joining Facebook groups of podcasters, going to podcast conferences. There's Work It in November in New York City. There's Podcast Movement in the summer. Next summer it'll be in Orlando. Going to conferences where you can connect with other podcasters. And finally, spend some money. To find listeners, you're sometimes going to have to invest. When we launched the Bible Binge, we decided to do an influencer campaign. So we put together boxes, like we were like an advertising agency, and we put together influencer packages, and we DM'd people randomly, not randomly, we thought of who our listener would be, and then we looked at our Instagram analytics, and we found everybody who had a lot of followers who were following us. People who had 70,000 followers were like, hello, can we have your mailing address? We promise not to sell it. And then they would give us their mailing address, and we sent them an influencer package that we knew was Instagrammable. We knew that it would be something that they would post and talk about. We gave them early access to an episode before we launched, and we timed that right before the launch. And that ended up having our first episode now has over 50,000 downloads of that episode because it just launched really well. So spending some money on advertising, on Instagram, targeting. When we target for live shows, we do live shows 4 to 5 times a year, and we target that city, and we're looking for people who listen to podcasts, who like this type, like they read People magazine, they live in this 100-mile radius. These are the people we're targeting to come to those shows. So spending some money.
Okay, so before we get to questions, we have a couple tips to give you just based off our experiences. My first tip is pay attention to your boredom. So if the thing you created, if you find it a little boring, imagine how boring we think it is. So like improve that. When I'm editing, if I ever get to a section, I'm like, I don't know, this feels slow. It's real slow, so I always cut that. But even more broadly, like if you get bored explaining what your show's about, or you get bored in the process of creating your show, that's a bad sign. You might want to tweak that or try to exchange that for a little more compelling, vivid idea. I
talk about Nas a lot on our show, and it gets cut every time because I do it in a boring way. So you never get to hear about Nas and my feelings about him. My tip is to commit to a timeline. Make a commitment. For you, it might be, we're starting a show, we're going to do it for 6 months no matter what. We're not going to phone this in. We are going to be committed for 6 months. And in 6 months, reevaluate and go, this is way more work than payoff, we don't want to do it. Or you'll come at the end of that and you'll go, oh, this was totally worth it, we really committed. Particularly if you're working with a panel or a partnership, be very clear of that up front. For us, we were 2 years in and we were really tired of doing it. Not because it wasn't fun, but because it had gotten to be so much more work, but we still had other jobs. And so we were in that like tipping point of like, what do we do? And so in January of 2016, we said, okay, we're going to set 7 goals, and we have to reach every one of these goals. And if we don't reach every single one of them by August, we'll quit the show. Do we agree? We agreed. And so we worked really hard for 8 months. And for 4 months is when we worked really hard, because 7 of the goals we reached within 4 months. And we almost were like, oh, should we redo the goals? But in month 8, that's when we reached our final goal, which was to create a membership site where people paid to listen to bonus content. And now that's one of the ways we make money is we have a membership site. We have 2,600 people who pay monthly to listen to bonus content. And having goals, having a timeline, setting it and committing to it is very important.
My other tip is DTR, determine the relationship. Anybody you're working with. We have a unique partnership because when we got into it, we didn't realize that our skill sets completely complemented each other. I'm terrible at social media, and I don't like marketing myself. Jamie's a wizard at it. Jamie still probably doesn't understand how the episode gets from my computer to the internet. That's fine, I do, so I do that, right? But even if you're not in a partnership, even if you are an interview show, or you have other people contributing content, communicate with them very clearly your expectations of them, how you want them to be prepared for the episode, how you want them to market it, or even if you're a solo show and you subcontract it out, communicate very quickly and clearly to the people you're working with what you expect out of the relationship, and that's the best way to set yourself up for success.
And my final tip is to be consistent. On Wednesdays, we podcast. Of course, we stole that from Mean Girls. On Wednesdays, we wear pink. We did on Wednesdays, we podcast. And now we sell product because people are like, oh, it's Wednesday. And they tell us, our listeners tell us, oh, it's Wednesday. I know you're there. This is so exciting. And so we built a consistent expectation of what's going to happen in our show. For you, it may be, I'm going to put out an episode every 2 weeks. I'm going to put out an episode every Thursday. Make it the same time every Thursday so that you train your audience to go, I can trust that they're going to provide the content when they say they're going to provide the content. When we first started, we would sometimes be like, we're already edited, let's go ahead and put it up. That seems fun. It's Tuesday afternoon at 6, that's fine, what's that? We got out of that habit quickly because we realized people, now if we don't have an episode on Wednesday, which we don't not have an episode on Wednesday, the DMs would be painful and awful, right? So expect your listeners to want a quality, consistent schedule. Okay, we know you have questions. We want to answer them all. We're very transparent with our business, so let's hear it.
Yeah, Knox, you were saying